Hello, everybody, and welcome to Documentation Not Included. It's Thursday, 7 p.m. BST. We're live on twitch.tv/DNI stream. It is time for the next show in our Developer Job series, episode version 2.11, Migration Mumbles. I am Josey Howarth, and as always, I am joined by the blue diamond to my lump of coal, my co-host, Chris Seabach.
I'm going to ask a quick question before I read my part of the script. 2.11 or 2.11?
I don't know. I usually go with 11 because it's an 11.
What would you say, Mark?
11.
Okay, I would always do 2.11. But anyway.
Well, see, to me, 2.11 makes me think there should be a dot included. So I would think it would be 2.1.1, like someone may have missed it, or
nothing is implied. Nothing is implied in the development world. Everything is explicit or nothing. Anyway,
hence
right.
11.
So, hello everybody in chat. Thank you very much for coming along. There's already a few little people, little things going on in chat.
People?
So, little people. I didn't mean it that way. So yes, if you do have anything to say during the show, we are live, so please do get involved. We will read out anything that is interesting, relevant, or funny. First of all, let me introduce our guest, Mark Walsh. Mark has been on the show before. He is a senior developer. And for the benefit of our listeners, Mark, can you please introduce yourself and tell people what you're here for?
Yeah, so I'm a tech lead of a startup based in Liverpool. And I've been through a lot of migration hell. So that's basically why I'm here. Yeah, that's it.
Fair enough.
Well, that's fair enough.
Very
and of course,
concise.
That is an exceptionally concise thing. I would love to look at your code someday. So before we get going, though, as always, we have an icebreaker question. It's a chance for us to ask something utterly and completely random that has nothing to do with anything and gives you a chance to get to know us better. And 9 times out of 10, it has absolutely nothing to do with development. So your question for today, my friends, if you could only speak using one word today, what one word would that be and why?
Oh, you'd have to add the why.
I was content with just the word without explanation.
I have to think about the why.
Wow.
I think I've got one. Eh. As in
PH?
eh? You know, like Zach Dingle on Emmerdale or whatever, you know. Eh?
I've never seen Emmerdale.
Well, it's one of his things. He goes, eh? And then answers people anyway. Just because it's just universal. You can, you can say eh to confirm something. You can say eh to ask a question. You can say eh to... I mean, I'd probably use an expletive, to be fair, over all of that. But I think that's probably the first place most of our brains went to, let's be honest.
Not mine.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe
well I guess, I don't know. I mean, there's for me, there's two. It would either be zoomies, because I do that anyway, or it would be bugger, because you can just say it for absolutely everything and anything. Like, if something is really cool, it's like bugger. And if something is really horrible, it's like bugger.
Well, that's an expletive in England. Bugger, isn't it?
Isn't it?
It's a mild expletive.
Yeah.
Mild?
Yeah. Well, it actually has a literal meaning as well, which I'm not going to explain. Please go and look it up on Urban Dictionary. There are other fake dictionaries out there.
Yeah, see, for me, it would be zoomies, or it would be that.
Zoomies in the sense of, like, so zoomies to me means a dog that's going crazy, but...
Yes.
We call that mad half hour.
Yes.
It's a mad half hour.
Zoomies. Well, I say zoomies for a lot of different things. So I say zoomies when excited, it's just, it's a thing. I love the /r. So yeah.
So I think mine would be yes, but I'm going to caveat that with.
That's a dangerous one.
The only reason it's yes is because I would probably carry out whatever was asked of me as well as a bonus. So not only would it be saying yes, but I'd be doing whatever was asked of me.
That'd be a long day.
That'd be a very long day. And I'd like to know where it'd end up.
Well, see, there's actually a talk that someone did about that, saying yes to absolutely everything. What happens if you do say yes to absolutely everything? And there's it's self-help kind of a thing to it. So it would be interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah. So there's our icebreaker.
All right, good stuff. Right, so anyway, today's show is about migrations. The wonderful, wonderful world of migrating code specifically. We're going to try and keep it as non-technical as possible, but obviously we will be giving you some examples of technical migrations, as Mark is currently in the process of doing that, and both of us have had lots of experience of migrating code. So to start off, Mark, let's give our audience an explanation of what a code migration is, if we can do that in a concise way.
I don't know about concise.
Practice your concise methods. Well,
let's pick the first example that comes to mind, which would probably be a framework migration. Don't know if you agree with that, but I'm going to go with that anyway.
It's fine.
It's got legs.
Well, it's exactly what a lot of people are actually in, is some kind of framework migration, whether they're going from Vue to React, or they're going from PHP to Angular, or not PHP to Angular. That's not what I meant, but that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You technically could go from PHP to Angular, but you'd have to have something else as well in the background to Node or something. But anyway, yeah, go on, Mark.
Yeah. So I suppose that's a great first example. Let's just say, I'm not going to get too technical here, but you're a JavaScript developer and you've had many years developing applications in Angular, and suddenly Angular is not the cool technology anymore, which is actually the case. React comes along, trumps it, and basically now everyone wants developers with React experience. And that's basically, that's a framework migration. But not only have you got that, you've actually got migrations within that framework. So it's like migrationception.
Yeah. So we've got migrations from like major versions, like version 5 to version 6 of Angular, had some significant changes in it, using that as a specific example. And that meant that we could have left a lot of our code as it was, but we were required, and this is just a standard maintenance upgrade really, we were required to change a few things because they would become obsolete in the future. So yeah, it happened to me in fact with 2 projects recently. A couple of weeks ago I had to migrate from I think 5 to 8, which is the most recent version, which luckily it wasn't too complicated, it didn't take too long, and it was fairly well written, so I didn't have too much of a headache. But
yeah, so I would say that those 2 are the big hitters, especially going from a framework to another framework, because that's a whole relearning piece. I mean, upgrading and fixing deprecations, if hopefully the thing that you're upgrading is maintained by someone who's nice and gives you those deprecation warnings, which I assume is the case with Angular.
Yes.
Well, Angular is pretty nice about that. But we've actually had an RTFM on the show before where I got very, very pissed off because there was an upgrade and there were hidden things and, variables
undocumented things
that were not documented, and it actually broke something I was working on. So yeah. Be nice to us.
So specifically a migration, for those who are still possibly confused about what it is, a migration is taking code that is either legacy, old in some way, or even just different, and changing that. So let's say you've got a piece of code that sends an email, simple, class, does something, right? That you need to rewrite that or change it or upgrade parts of the code. There's lots of different ways to do a migration, which we'll go through in a minute, but it's basically taking one format, making it into another format. That's it. The very simplest terms, I think.
Yes.
And of course, with that, then we get to the complexity.
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. So let's ask another question then, Matt. Why Vue? Are you currently in the process of a migration?
Yes. So I'm currently in the process of migrating a suite of microservices from .NET Classic to .NET Core, which is the latest version of .NET, which is cross-platform compatible, all shiny, and such a sexy framework compared to what it was.
So
out of
that's
curiosity,
go on, Josey.
did you want to make this change, or was this a change that came from bean counters? Was this a change that came because you felt like, oh gosh, we have to? Is it because of deprecation? Like, why this change?
It's actually a really strange change, because I would love to say, hey, because I want to work with the latest technologies. Who doesn't? But it's actually more to do with scalability. I'm not going to go into, in fact, I could go into the details of it, but basically our hosting provider allows very, very high volume scaling, but only on Linux. So
yeah, I mean, this is exactly why we would migrate from a .NET Classic, which is Windows only. I mean, we can do high horizontal and vertical scaling in Windows, but it's more about this new shiny framework and the use of resources on the host system as well. So in a Linux environment, and this new shiny framework that's been written from the ground up, which isn't the same framework. It's not the latest version of .NET either. That's something that I have to be clear about. There's still a use for classic .NET. .NET Core is all I've used for the last few years, to be fair, but mainly because we're Dockerizing and we're making it into, again, scalable, containerized environments.
Well, see, that's the thing. A lot of, gosh, I remember way back in the day when I started getting into development and things, for me, it was C. It was the world of C, going back to Fortran, all the fun little toys that go with it. And every new version of an assembler or an IDE that came out, or a library or thing, was like huge news. Now it's so commonplace, it's insane. But a lot of it seems to be driven by the hardware world and the changes that are happening there. Because I remember back in the day, if you wanted to have a server, you had a physical server. But we've actually gone so far into virtualization now that applications are just having to be developed with that in mind. And we've seen so many wonderful things in the world of containerization, which we've had a show about. Go back and watch. But it seems... It seems to me that the migration that happens internally, or not necessarily always internally, but the hardware side, is always going to have an impact on our devs.
Well, not always, and that's the interesting thing about .NET Core specifically, in that now we're in .NET Core. I mean, this is now, we don't have visibility of what the next big thing's going to be in the back-end world. Mark and I are both .NET developers. That's our bread and butter. That's the back-end technology that I assume Mark would also choose for anything that he does. We could choose Node, as a backend. That's another modern thing. We could use Java web services.
NPM, the win.
We could. There's a million different ways to do everything. That's the thing.
Yes, that's a thing. Yeah.
But the beauty of this is that it is focused. This .NET Core is focused on being multi-platform. I could deploy it to a Mac server if I wanted to, and surprisingly, one of my clients has a Mac server that they spent a fortune on that they don't use. Yes, I'll tell you about that some other day. But the thing is
yeah, I'm sorry. That was just jaw hitting the floor for those of you who are not watching us and listening on the podcast. My jaw just literally hit my desk.
I mean, as a .NET guy, we've always been very Windows focused. How our whole world has been IIS, Internet Information Services, which is Windows or Microsoft's web server, which is very configurable, but also very bloated and has lots of scaling problems in itself. We've got Azure now, which most of Azure is actually based on Linux, which is very interesting. Most of the back end of Azure, but the fact that we can deploy this on any platform now is what makes it really interesting, and it's a perfectly valid reason to migrate, bringing us back to migration.
Well, yeah, that's my point, though. I mean, the technology and stuff is now there to make it possible. I mean, you didn't have .NET Core like what, 8 years ago?
No.
Probably a lot sooner than that. I can't actually remember exactly when the first version was released out of release candidate.
I think it was 2014, maybe 15.
It's definitely after 2010. I just can't remember exactly when.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, Mark, you made the comment that, who doesn't want to be working on the latest and greatest? I know people who get really excited by every new version of React or Angular, or in some cases even PHP, because when PHP versions, there are some crazy things and anyway. But it's not always possible to do that.
And it's not always sensible from a business perspective either.
Try convincing a bean counter to give you the actual budget to do some of the things that are required, and it can be like chasing like a ghost.
Just trying convincing a stakeholder who has no idea what you do on a daily basis and goes, that team over there that basically run our business, they cost us $100,000. No, actually, 100,000. Where am I? In America, and also hiring really cheap people. This costs us $1 million, £1 million per year, $1 million pounds per year. That team over there costs us this much. How can we reduce that cost? And then they come to you and say, right, we need to do this code migration so we can enable these new features, or we can secure the application for the, this is going to stop a potential maybe hack that might happen in the future, a security issue. And they're like, well, why do you need extra time why is that important? Is it affecting us right now? And it's very difficult to justify that to the finance team.
It's funny because I've recently had a project within the past 2 years where I put in a request for the budget in order to do a migration because I knew a change was coming to PHP. And I knew that a change was coming in such a way that if I didn't do proactive, development for this particular site, it would become vulnerable, it would break, functionality would be lost. And for the mission critical statement, because lives depend on this kind of a functioning site, I'm like, I need this stuff. And I chased them. I mean, I knew it was coming up, so I gave them an 8-month lead time. And I chased them once a week. And it was only 2 weeks before this cutoff date that they gave me the approval.
It's usually 2 weeks after, in my experience. I think that was quite lucky, to be fair.
I think it's because I gave them a good 7.5 months of just constantly going, you need to approve this budget. You need to approve this budget. Now, I happened to be in the case where I knew that the approval was coming. It's just they had to go through the board. The way they said they had to do a lot of different things. So I did a lot of the work on the side while I was waiting. And then when it came in and they're like, yes, here's your budget for it. And I'm like, oh, push. And it was just like, ta-da. And they loved me for it. So, but you don't always get that luxury.
So I'm not actually we got to the point of why you're doing the migration, Mark. What is the reason that you're doing it? Just for the scalability?
Oh, he
or
said
is
scalability.
Is it for the multi-platform?
Scalability, but not too bothered about the fact that it runs on Linux. It's a means to an end for us.
Right.
So it's more to do with load, and also it's a bit of a cost saving exercise. Last time I sort of weighed up the differences between running on Linux. I know this is going to be a very abstract term, but the differences between running on Linux and running on Windows machines, I think the actual running costs were reduced by 2/3.
Which is, which
is significant.
That is a good reason to go back to that. That gets the stakeholders' eyes open.
That's where I always start.
Yeah, well, you have to have the proof behind that as well. But
was that licensing?
Well,
yeah.
Licensing and also the efficiency of the hardware that it has to run on, or the underlying operating system calls that it needs to run the same processes on top of it.
Yeah.
Unless
Mark has any other reasons for.
No, that's basically it. I think it is mostly licensing. We just know that it's more expensive to run Windows boxes as opposed to Linux, and that's good enough for the stakeholders. So it's good enough for me.
So then, and out of curiosity, I mean, that's sort of the financial side. Is there actually, or are you seeing an improvement in the actual speed of the system that you're developing itself, or is there? My brain just can't remember the process speeds and stuff. My brain can't.
Resource overhead. So
thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of the word resource.
Yeah. So it takes about 6 minutes for one of our Windows machines to kind of boot up and be ready. We do various things during that initialization, so that's probably not as low as it could be. But you're talking the equivalent. We're essentially moving to AWS Fargate. The equivalent is about 6 seconds.
Yeah.
To spin up a workable, runnable instance with our application on. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? I mean,
the world we live in, my mind is just constantly blown.
Yeah.
There are different. I mean, I'm not going to Windows bash here. It's easy to do because it's easy for Windows to be deemed as slower. But when you look at where Windows is going, if you're talking about a virtual server or a virtual machine, then yes, that's going to take a while to boot up, and that is the classic way of doing things. If you go to a VPS or a virtualized Windows environment or a hypervisor Windows environment, it's still going to be slower than the Linux alternative. It's still going to cost more than the Linux alternative because of the licensing model, but you can get things running as quickly, especially with server core and that kind of thing. We're getting a bit too technical here, a bit too specific, but it's interesting. It's interesting that that's your reason, because I've seen many reasons in the past to migrate. The trend at the moment is to go into this cloud-based, horizontal scaling capable environment. One of my tasks at the moment is actually to look at horizontal scaling for future. But we don't have any idea about how many people are going to use the system. So we're in a different place for you, where you've got actual metrics, and you can probably do some A/B tests against what you've currently got, and then what you're working towards, and use that as proof.
Okay, so you have in your particular case, you have your framework migrations.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing it for scalability, and you're not changing from like bash to like Go or something like that. This is sort of almost a evolution of your framework.
Yes, no, that's the thing.
It's sort of like an evolution. I mean,
the untrained eye can look at .NET Classic, which is still a legit. It's called Classic because I think they're trying to deprecate it in the world's eye, because Microsoft are very much moving towards the Linux world these days. They are. The new CEO is very open source, very kind of, he's pushing that world, and they need to. To be fair, they have to be more open with the current state of technology, or the current where they were previously was very closed, like Apple is. Apple is a very closed company when it comes to their development practices. They're not enterprise friendly. Microsoft these days are very enterprise friendly, and they always kind of have been, and that's where they make their money. But the .NET Classic migration to .NET Core is it used to have less features. I think it's pretty much caught up now from my experience. I haven't run into any real issues with it. Not having support, not having library support, and everything's moving RESTful, so WCF isn't as important as it used to be. Again, we're getting a bit too technical there, but
WCF.
Getting WCF still has a very valid use case in some enterprises. It just really depends on.
Well, we can say that about absolutely everything. But my point, though, I was leading to a question, but oh God.
COBOL, Perl, even Perl. I mean, Perl still gets used some places, but
Perl is actually used in quite a few places. But yes, my question for you is: in this process, what challenges are you facing? Because it sounds like you're mid-process, so you've already done the project planning for this. Or are you in the project planning phase?
I'm in the implementation phase. So I'm I'm in the midst of it.
You're in the mud.
Yeah, I'm in the mud. Yeah, help me. To be honest, most of the challenges I've faced is the shift in thinking rather than the actual migration itself, because syntactically, it's basically the same language. I mean, it is the same language. There's not that many pitfalls. I did try to use a library which just hasn't been ported over yet, and that was like 95% of the way of converting a microservice, and I just sort of went, oh God, I really need it. That was system.drawing, which is coming in the next version. But getting that far along and then just thinking, because I just thought, oh, I don't use that for anything, and then I think I used it for like a logo resizing or something.
But it was really important for that specific user, and it's like, right, I'm gonna have to find some alternative, and that was what .NET Core was when it was in its first couple of iterations. Very, very difficult to do an implementation, but we've passed that, and there's only a few now, and
So we're over the hump. There's still a few things which are kind of, I can't see any evidence for them for there being a suitable alternative. I don't want to get too technical, but
the comparison I can make between the two versions, the main difference was the way that you build services. You build the services up from scratch. Now, there was an implementation in .NET Classic that also did that, but it wasn't very well supported, and it wasn't pushed by Microsoft because they wanted to push it in the new .NET Core version. So instead of having a lot of magic happen when you create a project in .NET Classic and you click play or you run the service in IIS and it hosts it and it just works, you just create some controllers and something. Now you have to, all .NET Core projects are all the same. They all essentially are console applications, and you build what you need. If you need it to be a CLI executable, you can build that. If you want it to be a web service, you can build that with plugins. I can't remember what they call them. The names of the
middleware.
Yeah, middleware. That's it. Yeah, or you can make a desktop application with it as well. There's lots of other alternatives as well, and there's loads of people that have built on top of this, and it's very easy to see what's been built, but it can get very messy very, very quickly to initialize it. There's a way to organize it I've kind of developed myself, but I'm sure other people have developed their own ways as well. That's the main difference. Everything else is very, very similar. Very similar.
So in your particular case, it's those little missing library sets and things that you're just like, oh, I used it once, but now yeah, one of those. What about you, Chris?
What about me? Which bit? I just talked all over Mark then.
Well, you just talked all over Mark. I'm curious what challenges you may have faced when doing a migration.
Oh God, it depends on the type of migration, and that's something we haven't really covered. We were talking about a framework migration at the moment, which is migrating from an old version to a new-ish kind of version. I've migrated from, let's take a JavaScript framework. We use an example of Vue to Angular, or Angular to Vue. We've also got a migration from AngularJS to Angular, which doesn't make much sense, but Angular 2, as some people call it, but it is officially called Angular. AngularJS and Angular are two entirely separate animals. It's like going, well, the same goes for loads of other JS frameworks. Backbone, if you wanted to go from Backbone to AngularJS, back when that was the migration path, or Knockout to AngularJS, it is essentially a rewrite, an entire rewrite of the application. There are some bits of logic you can take, but the way that you use the frameworks are very, very different. It's like, again, moving from trying to write something in C and then trying to write something in C++. They're two different animals. They've got some similarities.
I learned those right after each other, and my brain exploded.
I don't know them, but I know.
And then I discovered C#, and I was like, oh.
I don't know them, but I know enough about C and C++ to know that they are drastically different. They've got similar syntax, but C++ is object-oriented, and C is not. I don't know exactly what you would call C. It's not functional, so I don't know exactly, but it's not. We've got these. I've been involved in so many migrations, it's hard to tell. I've had legacy code migrations where we've taken not just an old framework, but we've rewritten an application entirely because it's completely unsuitable, or it's now monolithic, and we've got new framework, not just new frameworks, we've got new patterns, new software patterns that are trendy. CQRS is the big thing. Maybe it's been superseded by something by now, but last time I was hit in the face by a new design pattern, it was CQRS, and I was like, well, what's this? This is a brand new acronym I've not heard of. Read it up and I realized I've been doing it for years, but not officially, It's one of them things like, right, so I don't know how to write it. I don't know how to write it exactly like Martin Fowler tells me it should be written or something, but it's about making, we're constantly improving ourselves when we do a migration, and we're constantly making steps in the right direction, because software and the IT industry is still very new. It is taken over the world, but we are junior in comparison to the vast majority of other industries in the world.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think you said a thing, I had a thought, and it went out the window. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to bring up the question that Ethercall has asked.
I was just going to say that, because that's actually something I wanted to talk about as well.
Thing. And Ethercall has asked, how do you sensibly know when it's time to migrate from one system to another? And that's what my thought was. You were talking about how you did the migration, and never mind, it's gone again. Never mind.
So
Josey's brain is not working today.
How do you sensibly know when it's time to migrate from one system to another? Now, there's so many connotations with that sentence. What kind of... I mean, we've got the different types of migration, so let's quickly go over the different types of migrations. We've got legacy, framework, legacy code changes, framework. We've got platform migrations, which you can consider as framework, but it's, for example, migrating from Windows to Linux. You sometimes don't have the choice, like .NET Core. If we had a .NET Core application, we wanted to move that from the Linux environment. God knows why you'd want to do that, but from the Linux environment into a Windows environment, you're going to have some changes, but it's going to be very minimal, that migration.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be some changes because there's things like file paths are dealt with differently, and if you don't write them in a generic fashion, it's difficult for us to just copy and paste or deploy an application to a new platform. Then we've got things like...
Why won't this compile?
Yeah.
Why won't this compile?
Well, it'll compile. It just will break as soon as you try and access the third-party resource. The thing is, your integration tests might even pass because your integration tests are probably running on a Linux server, but then you deploy it to a Windows server and it suddenly breaks. So this is every time we design something as a developer, we want to be looking at making it as generic as we humanly can, but then you're also hit by constraints and the amount of time that you spend on each test and all of that.
So, yeah, going back to what Chris is saying here, we have the legacy, the platform, the framework, the language migration as well.
So again, that's going from something like C to C++. We've got, it's not just that's not a framework migration, really.
Not really. No.
Or is it? I mean, is it? You're changing compilers, so...
See, this is the thing. I mean, when you look at an application that you design, gaming. Let's go to gaming really quick, Chris. You've got experience in Unity. You've got experience doing gaming and things like that. If you swapped from, say, Unity to, I don't know, Chrysalis, what are the other game engines that are out there?
Unreal,
Unreal, whatever, what have you. Would you personally consider that a framework migration, or would you consider that a platform migration, or would you consider that a language migration?
That's all three. It's all types of... That's an entire rewrite. There is very little, unless it's an algorithm. Now, we us developers love this word algorithm. And I love algorithms.
So they make the world go round.
I'm working with academics at the moment, and I swear to God, I've never heard anybody say algorithm as much as these guys. It's their world is algorithms. But the algorithm is the way we would implement something. It's not the framework, the language, or anything. We can take the algorithms if we've written something complicated and migrate that over and translate it into the new code. But the framework, the language, everything, the way that we create, like in a game, in a computer game, you instantiate game objects and create them. The way that is done is different in every single engine. So that's an engine migration. That's
basically I now migrate. Okay, so going back to Ethercall's question about the sensibly know when it's time to move from one system to another. Let's start with the worst case scenario. Everything stops working.
Fix it. Sticky plaster on the problem. Now, honestly, the only way to really sensibly answer this question, unless Mark has another way of answering this, is when it needs it. We all want to work on new code. When the business needs it. It's even a better way of saying it.
Well, see, this is the thing. We have had shows where we've talked about, team members coming on and they have just finished school or come from some place that's pure bleeding edge, and you're still working with what they would consider a legacy system, and they're like, we need to change this, and things never get finished because there's this constant need to be bleeding edge, which is bad. I think what we should do, instead of trying to say how, but what questions should you be asking?
You should be asking is there a cost associated with this migration? Mark has already answered these questions pretty much. Are there a cost associated with it? Is there a need for it technically for us to migrate it? You cannot and you should not ever migrate because you want to. Because you feel like it's...
God.
If it's a legacy systems are perfectly fine to work with if they work and make money for the business. But they're not... I mean, they're not nice to work on.
There's still a market for COBOL.
Yeah, I mean... Legacy can be .NET Classic. That's the thing. It doesn't.
Well,
Legacy can be the last version of Angular. It depends.
it could be, yes.
People call a system legacy because they don't like it anymore. That's the
Well,
thing.
yeah, legacy can be the thing that is like 20 years old, or it could be the thing that you developed last year. Like, legacy is completely subjective in its terminology.
That's the best. Yeah, subjective is the best way to describe it.
What
do you think, Mark? What do you think is a good reason to, or at what point is a good point to migrate? Is there a breaking point?
I think if you break scalability and cost are both breaking points. I would say that there's other ones that kind of fly under the radar. And this is going to sound really weird because I would never say this would prompt a migration, but it's a contributing factor, and that is recruitment.
CV-driven development.
Yeah, well, not for me. I'm talking as from a business point of view. I've had that conversation before, as in, hey, if I was on the market looking right now, why would I ever take a .NET Classic job when I could just take a .NET Core job and I'd work with the latest framework? Like, you lose out on the best candidates because the best candidates want to use the latest technology if they're going to join a company.
I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that. I don't know. Maybe it's because Chris and I are consultants and freelancers and things like that. But a lot of the developers that I know, not you counting, Mark, because you seem to be sort of like, I don't know.
The thing is, there's a trendy developer and then there's a good developer. And a good developer knows what the business wants. And I keep going back to this. I have realised over the years that I used to be an obstinate twat when it came to my development practices. I wanted to work with the latest technologies. I wanted to do this. But I also appreciate that the needs of the business come first over everything else. I don't want to take a job that's legacy. No, I don't want to. But if the company's right and the culture's right, that just because they're working on legacy code doesn't mean that they've got an invalid culture. But that doesn't mean you're not going to get someone on board either.
Well, see, this is the thing. And maybe it's a matter of perspective. If you want to make a boatload of money as a developer, you need to go hardcore niche, because there are going to be jobs out there for those COBOL developers for a system that has been running for 20 plus years and it literally cannot change for some silly reason that something happened. I can't remember. There was someone who told me about it like 2 years ago, and they gave me an example for why they could not leave the COBOL system. And my brain just exploded. Their developers in that particular field are paid mint.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you really want to go that crazy, feel free to go niche. I'll tell you that right now. However, your statement, Chris, about, it's whatever's best for the business, it's what'll get people in the seats. Like, for example, in the show that you had last week, where sadly I wasn't here, you guys were talking about those people who come in to bolster their workforce really quick to get a project pushed out, doing some kind of part of the dev thing, and then they're gone. Sometimes they do that because they can't find anyone to come in and work on legacy versus bleeding edge. And sometimes, I can understand how terrifying it can be for recruiters, and we'll be having a recruiter on at some point in time so we can talk about this good stuff. But when you have a business need to have your systems up and running and functional, and you need it, and it's, I don't know, let's just say it's in like C, okay? And it can't be migrated, it can't be ported, either due to budget constraints or because of something the way that was written or a system or the Linux box it's on, whatever. And in this particular case, you're trying to find someone to fill that role, and nobody bites. Nobody bites at all.
I have exactly that problem at the moment. It's not legacy code, but it's so niche that it requires somebody who doesn't really exist. It requires people who have skills in 2 different worlds, 3 different worlds even, potentially.
Wow.
And I've never met anybody. I mean, I'm the closest they're going to get to it, but I'm still not comfortable in that particular environment, Ethrical's just said something quite interesting.
Yeah, he has, and my brain just...
Legacy is a thorn in my side. Devs not wanting to touch it. It's required, yet it exposes the business to risks due to it being old, unsupported technology. Now, that's another reason to migrate is security. We've already mentioned it. Security and support as well going forward.
Oh, yeah.
And
oh, my gosh, yeah.
I understand devs not wanting to touch it, but, you know, just deal with it. It's your job. I'm sorry, but we all have to touch code that we don't. I've touched so many bits of code in the recent years that I've not been an expert in, but it's my job to understand it and figure out what it does, and you know, and not support it because I'm not a support guy. I'm a consultant, but I still need to look at it. I still need to install things on my computer and slow it down a little bit. And boo-hoo. Oh, Jesus Christ.
But see, here's the thing, Chris. You're perfect. And this is something we understand. But, you know, I know a lot of developers who will not touch that stuff. They just won't.
They're scared of touching it. This is the tech debt that Mark was actually talking about last time he was on the show.
Yes. I mean, tech debt. Oh man, tech debt. That's it's a total show into itself.
We've done it.
Intense.
It's all right. You missed that one, Josey.
No, I didn't miss it. I have watched. Wow.
I mean, you weren't here.
No, but I was here in spirit. I promise.
Of course.
But no. To me, when you find yourself in a situation where you're that desperate, where the actual reason why you're having to do some kind of migration is more desperation than anything else, and it's business desperation, I feel that is actually a place where things can go downhill really, really quickly, because you could get yourself a fantastic paper warrior in there who's going to be like, yeah, this is how we should do it. And then as you start hiring, you bring in people and they're like, yeah, this is not the right system. And no one wants to listen to them. Again, it's all different places. But
yeah,
I don't know. It's a really, really weird one. I mean, you just said, Mark, that if you went to go look for a job right now, you would be looking for a classic job, or would you be looking for a core?
It would the preferable. I wouldn't say no to a .NET Classic job. I think I agree with Chris. It's all about the culture. I wouldn't join a company who were using .NET Core, but they were a toxic company or it was terrible working conditions. Working conditions always trump the framework for me anyway. But
it should for everybody.
There is this misconception, though, that developers, that in a developer's mind, in a lot of developers' minds, that they need to have that specific experience on their CV. They need to have the latest stuff on there. I often, as long as I can sell myself and say that I'm capable of working in this new technology and prove in the short interview that I have that I'm capable of working in it, I mean, I could lie to them. I could tell them that I've done work in that and convince them that I've done work in that. But when they start asking me technical questions around it, I might get a little bit stuck. I mean, for God's sake, before I had my first Angular job, completely, I had never touched it. I did a technical test online and I got 9 out of 10 or whatever it was for the test. Never touched it before in my life, but I managed to wangle it. Went into the interview and got the tech lead job. But it doesn't matter as long as you know how to program, and the breadth of knowledge is more interesting to me than limited knowledge as someone who recruits people.
See, to me, that's, I think, the key. And one of the things that if anyone who is listening to us ever, and if this is the only thing you ever take away from it, if you understand the very basics, and by very basics, I mean how variables work, how memory works, how you store things, how you output things. If you kind of get that and understand a bit of the algorithm, you can do anything in any language. You just have to learn how that language translates what you're trying to get that algorithm to do. And I'm using algorithm on purpose.
I'm a .NET expert, but I don't know everything about .NET. I have to constantly have references up.
It's impossible.
It's ridiculous to know.
It's impossible to know everything about everything in this day and age. I'm sorry. I call bullshit on anyone who sits there and says, I know everything. It's impossible.
This is why I hate interviews when someone asks me a very specific question, like, how does the link group by work?
Yeah.
I don't know. I figure it out while I'm writing it, I know when to use it. If you phrase the question slightly differently, I might be able to answer it better. But I don't know. I don't know the syntax off the top of my head, isn't it?
This is why technical tests are both good and bad. Oh. Okay.
Yeah. That's a whole new episode, isn't it? Really?
It is.
It really is. So I have a quick question for you then, Mark, before we move into doing our TFM. If you had a piece of advice you could offer anybody who is considering migration, planning migration, implementing migration, or doing the cleanup of a migration, is there any piece of advice you would give them?
Start small. In fact, no. Yes. I'm just contradicting myself.
Have you heard of a strangler application?
No. Is it like a spike?
No. Oh God, spikes! I'm in the middle of trying to explain what spikes are to stakeholders. My God, but no, a strangler application is an application that sits over the top of an existing application. Not necessarily technically, but it might operate in unison at the same time as it until you finish the migration. That's a simple way of looking at it. But it's a way to migrate without it being too disjointed and too jolty, you know.
It gives you the opportunity, especially the piece of advice I would give is don't forget the migration of the data you had to the new system in your development and planning process, because that's important. But the Strangler application actually helps with something like that. So
So anyway, didn't let you actually give any advice, Mark. What in your experience, what would have made your
start small? Yes, no, yes.
What would if you'd have known something 12 months ago? I presume you've been doing this migration for a while.
Yeah.
If 12 months ago, what could you say to yourself now?
I would probably say consider the things around the actual migration are a lot more expensive, than the actual implementation of the migration. So the amount of stuff I've had to kind of wrangle with our CI server, our deployment server, that's probably about half of the effort. Just converting how we were deploying packages to how we're deploying packages now, the publishing of resources, that kind of thing.
And I bet there's been an implication on your processes as well, your internal processes and the way that you do things, like maybe even ticketing. And I don't know if that's been affected.
Not to the extent of ticketing, but definitely testing, functional testing, integration testing, not really unit testing, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, it's a migration this big has affected far more than you can anticipate. And I actually kind of wish I started. If I was going to do it again, I'd do a very small migration to kind of test the water, and then I'd move on to the hardest possible migration, because I kind of inadvertently left that to one of the last migrations. Right. So one of the hardest ones is, and after you've been doing it for 12 months, you're kind of exhausted. So I wish I'd kind of did it in that sort of very small and then very large sort of order. Not really in order, I suppose, but at least, small and then large.
Have you had the beauty of project management with this, or are you a self-managing team?
We're self-managing, which is amazing. We've got a product owner, but we don't have a what were you calling them? Bean counter? We don't have a bean counter who drinks coffee from Starbucks coming in every day who inexplicably has a briefcase. We don't have any of that.
I think Mark thinks quite highly of project managers, by the sounds of it.
No, maybe we should do an episode about how much.
Bean counters are accountants. They're the ones who signed a check for the budget. That's a bean counter.
Well, I don't know what this person would be called. Basically, in my experience, not very helpful.
Wow. You haven't worked with good project leads then, or project managers.
The thing is, product owners in a Scrum process are actually the project managers, and usually that means that the way that the team is the work is distributed across the team is self-managing. The team manage to get to the output themselves, and they can actually be quite visible with the stakeholders as well.
Does that mean they could be contractors?
It could be, yeah. Like they're just a development team member. There's only 3 roles defined in a Scrum process. We need to do a Scrum episode because I'm an expert on Scrum now.
Well, tell you what, I'll put it on our list. We're kind of booked for the next couple of episodes, but we are now at the point where it's time for the RTFM of our show, and this is where we get a chance to rant, rave, complain, and it can be about absolutely anything. Does not necessarily have to be dev or computer related. Do you have an RTFM? And I see a smile on your face. I'm going to have to go with you.
You're going to go with me first?
Yes, you have a smile on your face. It usually means that there's something that you've just thought of that might be fun or mildly annoying that you wish to just get off your chest.
Yeah, so it's completely unrelated. In fact, it is related.
Excellent.
It is related to developers, and it's kind of. See, I'm going to put me and Chris in a bracket of this doesn't apply to us because.
Oh wow!
So,
Great, so leave me in.
Well, you can come in the bracket as well.
You're not a developer, Josey.
Oh, is this no girls allowed type of a thing, or like, is it because I don't do .NET Core that I'm
No,
that's what it is.
In general, so my sort of bugbear of the week is developer communication.
How dare you take mine?
Was that yours?
Literally, it was going to be the Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Evil.
Developers are so bad at communicating. It's actually kind of unbelievable at times. That is communicating when they've started something, when they're having trouble, and when they're finished. It's the whole 3-stage process. So yeah, I mean that's basically my bugbear.
I would not say just developers. I'd say humans in general have a really bad time communicating. I say this because mine based is sort of like that, except it comes from the client perspective. I have had a client say that on their website they want live photos. Do you know what a live photo is?
Live models?
No.
Like a stream?
Live photo. Oh no, they said live photo and video. So what's live photo?
I don't know. Is it a GIF?
Is it a snapshot?
I have requested, please explain, show example. And they sent me to a website with like 90 things. And I'm like, no. Specific example. It's like communication. It's like someone gets in their brain. It makes a difference whether they're a developer or a client or someone fresh out of school. They'll get a term in their brain for what they're doing, and they will not let it go. And they expect everyone else to know exactly what they're talking about. And it's like, no, the entire purpose of communication is to speak in a way that helps the person you are speaking to understand what you're saying. And if you are not allowing for that type of an engagement, you're talking at someone, not actually
you're
having
dictating.
Communication.
Yeah,
exactly. And I'm this close to firing, like this close. I'm waiting for that straw, and I'm just like, maybe that straw is going to come now, maybe it's going to come later, but I was just like, what? Please.
Yeah.
Tiltepe says a king/developer on every hill.
I'm going to use a communication one just to feel like part of the team, just to feel like part of the podcast. I developer communication, but I'm going to say I'm going to use stakeholder understanding here. I've got currently got problems with people making decisions that are valid decisions, but not communicating those decisions to people in any meaningful way. So there might be a decision that people have been on holiday for a couple of weeks. While they're on holiday, they make a decision, and they have, they're a stakeholder, so they speak to the other stakeholders even when they're on holiday, because that does happen. And they make a decision, and then they don't tell anybody in the team. And then when we've been working on something for 3 weeks or whatever, and they come in and kind of just drop this bombshell like they've already communicated it, and it's like, right, so what? Not they don't ask why something hasn't happened, but they go, oh, and then this has been done, and this is what we're doing, and then everyone's like, what? That's completely changed everything that we've been working on for the last God knows how many months or whatever. Communication to me is absolute key. Nobody is too busy to communicate. Nobody is too busy to drop a quick email to somebody to say, we need a quick chat about this, or kick up a quick Skype meet, not Skype, don't use Skype, a quick meeting of some description. And yes. I'm an over communicator, if anything. I probably annoy people with the amount of detail I put into things. I spent the last God knows how many months detailing decisions and detailing and documenting everything that is a blocker that is stopping people from doing their job. All of these frustrations that are building up is all around communication. And it's so important, not just in the business world. I mean, if you're making money off, or you're trying to make money off something, it's paramount that everybody on your team is on your team. And you get better teamwork by communicating with each other. You get the less heads butting because they know what's going on. You know,
the problem is that we live in a world, or we even work in a world where people can get to a point of apathy, and that can come from stakeholders on down to, you know, the person who is changing the ink in your fax machine, if you still use fax machines. But, you know, the moment you get any one person who has some form of apathy in any particular area, all of a sudden communication just goes downhill, because they're just like, meh. But we're going to get too far off and go into an entire new episode if we keep up that topic of conversation. So instead, we're at the end of our show. A very big thank you to absolutely everybody in the Twitch chat for joining in, from Tultepe, Salako, and Vina, Ethrical. And thank you to everyone who is listening in on our podcast in the future. Finally, Mark, you rock, even though you wouldn't let me join your bracket.
I involved you in the bracket.
Yes, but you've left me out of the communication bracket at first, which of course is very sad and depressing, but that's okay. I'll get back at you. But yes, I hope you've enjoyed joining us again, knowing that we'll have to have you come back. Do you have anything you want to pimp out? People, places, books, videos, your own Twitter, your own projects?
No one wants to go on his Twitter.
No, you don't want to go on my Twitter.
That's it. He's going to get 1 million followers now. He said that.
It's unbearable.
I love that you think we have that much sway, Chris.
Well, you know,
we're influencers.
Oh God! There you go. There's my RTFM influencers.
Oh God. Yes. Anyway.
Mark.
Yeah. Nothing to pimp for myself. No.
Okay.
I never pimp myself though. I'm a kept man.
Whatever
that means.
There's always something going on that's. In fact, you know, most guests that come on don't really have anything to pimp. They do their, you know, their work and then their boring lives, really. But you know, outside of work.
That's okay. We actually have people who are also very involved in the open source communities, and
we have people who run their own business as well. So. And
we do have people who run their own businesses. So sometimes people have a pimp thing they want to pimp, and sometimes they're kept, I guess, to use Mark's terms.
And speaking of pimping, it's time for us to shamelessly pimp our own social channels, etc. You can visit our website on www.dnistream.live for links to all our social media channels, Discord, Dev Chat, and all the podcast discovery platforms on the planet. You can also use it to contact us for any reason. If you want to be a guest on the show, you've got anything interesting to say, or you want to tell us to shut up, or tell us to be a bit less rambly, please do. We want communication. Communicate with us via our website contact form. And Josie's lost it, so I might have to finish the show ourselves.
I'm sorry. Salako says, now you have to do an obligatory influencer bum shot on the beach. And Fultepe says, or running some fragile nature area or some other scandal. And that just set me off, because I'm just like, I just put, oh wow, I never mind. My mind went into like, you know, functions and a whole bunch of like, I went code wise, and it just, anyway, yes. I also have just to say goodbye to you all amazing people. We hope to see you guys next week, 7 p.m. UK time, here on twitch.tv/DNI stream. We love you. Bye.
Bye.